Good evening. You're watching Tonight live on GBNews. I'm Nana Akua. Now, it's been a big day for Health Secretary Matt Hancock, but this time it's because of his personal life rather than the coronavirus pandemic. Now, Matt Hancock has apologised for breaking social distancing guidance after pictures emerged of him kissing one of his aides in the Sun newspaper today. Now, at the time the picture was taken, apparently the guidance said people should keep their distance from anyone not in their household or support bubble. The Health Secretary, who's been married for 15 years and has 3 children, he released a statement saying that he'd let people down, I'd say, and asking for privacy for his family. Mr Hancock says, I accept that I breached the social distancing guidance in these circumstances. I've let people down and I'm very sorry. I remain focused on working to get the country out of this pandemic and will be grateful for privacy for my family on this personal matter. Despite admitting he broke the rules, the Health Secretary still has the support of Downing Street. After being asked by reporters why Mr Hancock remained in a post, a spokesman for the Prime Minister said the Health Secretary set out that he accepted he had breached the social distancing guidelines and he has apologised for that. The Prime Minister has accepted the Health Secretary's apology and considers the matter closed. But it doesn't seem like he's going to get off that easily. I mean, both Labour and the Liberal Democrats have accused the Health Secretary of hypocrisy for breaking coronavirus guidance and called on the Prime Minister to sack him. Concerns have also been raised about the people conflict over Mr Hancock's appointment of the woman he was caught kissing on CCTV. She was appointed to a taxpayer-funded role. So what do you think? Should the Health Secretary resign or should Prime Minister Boris Johnson fire him? That's the question. So joining me now to discuss this is Conservative MP Andrew Bridgen and Baroness Brinton, former President of the Liberal Democrats and their spokesperson for health. Well, it's a bit sticky and icky, this. I mean, it's a bit of a mess. What do you think, Matt Hancock? He's admitted to breaking the coronavirus guidance. I mean, should that be enough? What do you think? Let's start with you, Andrew.
Well, Nana, it is a private matter, but the fact is that if Matt Hancock felt that his performance in his role as Health Secretary at a vital time was diminished due to this relationship, he should have resigned. And if the Prime Minister thought that Matt Hancock's ability to perform his role at a vital time was diminished, he should have sacked him. Clearly, that's not the case. The fact that Matt Hancock has apologised for breaking the social distancing rule and it's been accepted by the Prime Minister, it is all well and good, but it will rub some of the public up the wrong way. Clearly, Matt Hancock has been someone who has been fundamental in setting out the rules that we've been obliged to live under during the lockdown period. I think, quite honestly, where it is now, the Prime Minister's got full confidence in Matt Hancock. If there are further revelations, that could be very difficult for Matt Hancock, quite honestly.
What do you think? Should he go? I mean, your actual thoughts.
I personally think, and I think there's a lot more goodwill for Matt Hancock out there in the public for the job he's done, a very difficult job during the pandemic with the public than there was for Mr Cummings. However, if there are further revelations, I think public opinion probably will turn, and that would make his position much more difficult. I'd like to see him see out the end of the pandemic at least and get us across to July the 19th and the public get their freedoms back. There's many good things the government have done during the pandemic. The procurement of the vaccines and the rollout of vaccines have been exemplar. I haven't always agreed with them on the speed of lifting the lockdown, but I'd like to see Matt Hancock see it through. Whether that's going to be possible or not will probably be decided this weekend.
Well, let's see. Baroness Brinton, what do you make of this? Do you think that he should go, and your reasoning?
I think the main problem is the hypocrisy. And just over a year ago, he said of Professor Neil Ferguson, who had been caught having an affair during lockdown, that actually it was the only thing that Professor Ferguson could do was to resign from SAGE. His position was untenable. And this is almost identical. It's breaking rules. The difference is that Matt Hancock is the government minister responsible for creating those rules. It isn't just guidance, it's in regulation which came before Parliament, and he knows perfectly well what the rules are. And that's the big problem, because people all afternoon, whether it's on television, on radio, I was down at my local shops earlier, all saying their own stories of how they've tried to manage over the last year and a bit. Saw pictures of the Queen sitting on her own at the funeral. I've got friends who were not allowed to hold their surviving parents' hand when the other parent died. All of those things are grating a really great deal. But the fundamental problem is that the public put their faith in Matt Hancock, and he's really let them down by this old thing of one rule for us and then a different rule for ministers. And that, I believe, will be his downfall.
And Boris Johnson is actually supporting him initially. Do you think this will actually end up affecting Boris as well, because he's lending his support and accepting the apology? Andrew?
I think it could reflect badly on the government. I'm going up with some volunteers to help out in Batley and Spen for the by-election tomorrow, and it will be interesting if this topic is raised on the doorstep and how much of an issue it is. Nothing like the response from the public we had over Dominic Cummings so far, but as I say, if there are further revelations tonight in the newspapers and over the weekend, that could change. There is considerably more goodwill out there for Matt Hancock and the difficult job he's done as Health Secretary throughout the pandemic than there was for Dominic Cummings.
And Baroness, what do you think of what he's saying? I mean, there's also the fact that the woman that he was kissing is funded by the taxpayer, and I'm presuming that Matt Hancock may have had a hand in her getting that job.
Very much so. I mean, in fact, there's three elements to the story. The first is she was appointed as a special advisor, and at the same time, she was given a parliamentary pass by a different minister. Then she was appointed as a non-executive director of the Department of Health and Social Care, for which she was remunerated by the public purse. And in all of those situations, all the TV pictures are showing that she has been going around acting as Matt Hancock's aide, which is quite extraordinary. Now, ministers are asked to abide by the Nolan principles of service in public life. And transparency, integrity, and selflessness are absolutely key parts of that. And even if you set aside the issue about that awful picture, the other elements are now going to have to be looked at. There's no doubt about it. There is something about this government that they just feel they can do things below the radar. And I think the public are getting crosser and crosser about it.
And I mean, you've heard what Baroness said. Do you think he might be able to ride it through? You said you'd like to see him get through the end of the pandemic, but as Baroness has pointed out, it does seem to be, things seem to be getting even more rotten as we sort of get through this. It's not looking good.
Well, no, they're jumping to conclusions. I think there needs to be some explanations given with regard to her employment. I have heard no accusations that she was not competent and capable of performing the duties that she had for the government. And let's see what answers come forward.
But let's be honest, though, Andrew. I mean, if you're doing a job and then you're sort of potentially carrying on with someone, I mean, we don't know how far this has gone, but you're sort of doing something that you sort of shouldn't be doing in your personal life, he's bound to be distracted. And there were some interesting moments during the pandemic. I mean, there was all the PPE and things like that. I mean, perhaps this did affect his job. I think that's what people are concerned with. You know, he was possibly distracted.
Well, if a minister employed someone they were in a relationship with, and that would be again a breach of the rules. If the relationship was there before they were employed and it wasn't declared, that would be a breach of the rules. With no evidence that that's the case here. Clearly, there are questions that need to be answered, but again, so there's no question that she was incapable of doing the duties as an advisor. I've heard that from no one who came into contact with her.
But if he was to stay, I mean, how much credibility would he actually have? That's the thing. I mean, you know, I'm sure, as Baroness has pointed out.
Well, ultimately, he's the health secretary that's taken us through the worst pandemic in 100 years, and we've come out of it ahead of most of our competitor economies, with better vaccination figures and a fantastic rollout. We're going to be providing vaccines to the rest of the world with AstraZeneca at cost. The only vaccine that can possibly be used in any quantity by the developing world. That's a great achievement out of a pretty bad situation on the whole.
Well, Baroness, does that cut it for you? Would that do it for you?
No. No, I mean, first of all, he's not the Minister for Vaccines. But secondly, he's having a really bad week as Secretary of State in his role as Secretary of State. This morning, the National Audit Office published a report on the test and trace system going into the big lockdown that we had with the massive rise in cases before Christmas, saying that it just wasn't working properly, and there've been a lot of money spent, but no evidence of tests carried out. And then 2 days ago, Jeremy Hunt and Greg Clark, the chairs of the Health and Science Select Committees, wrote back to him after his evidence last week, saying that what he'd said to them did not tally with the minutes of SAGE, and asking him to explain himself. So he's got problems on all fronts.